Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Commander Mark Linden. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what those men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Flight Sergeant John Keith Scott. Born in Brisbane on the 7th of February 1923, John Keith Scott was the son of John and Elsie Scott of Beechmont, Queensland. Growing up, the young John Scott attended Beechworth State School before attending Brisbane Boys College. A keen sportsman, he played tennis and cricket and participated in rowing. Upon completing his schooling, Scott worked as a farmhand on his father's dairy farm at Beechmont. On the 23rd of May 1942, Scott enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force and began training as a bomber pilot. After his initial training in Australia, Scott embarked in Melbourne on the 15th of April 1943 for overseas service. As part of the Empire Air Training Scheme, he was one of the almost 27,500 Royal Australian Air Force pilots, navigators, wireless operators, gunners and engineers who throughout the course of the war joined Royal Air Force squadrons or Australian squadrons based in Britain. Scott's journey to Britain took him first to Canada, where he undertook further training before embarking in Halifax in September 1943. After arriving in Britain, Scott undertook further specialist training before he was posted to No. 9 Squadron, Royal Air Force in July 1944. As part of the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command, No. 9 Squadron was equipped with 4-engined Avro Lancaster heavy bombers. On the 13th of August 1944, the Lancaster in which Scott was bomb aimer was on a daylight mission to bomb the U-boat pens and shipping in the harbour at Brest on the western coast of France when it was hit by flak. Other crews reported that the aircraft had a wingtip shot off. It dived and crashed into the ground. Scott and all of his crewmates were killed. They were the Australians Flight Sergeant Cyril Scott, Flight Sergeant Charles Edwards, Flight Sergeant Douglas McConville and Flight Sergeant William Andrew, and British pilot Flight Lieutenant Edward Relton and Sergeant Frederick Johnson. The bodies of the crew were recovered from the crash and Scott was buried alongside his crewmates in the Plougastel d'Aulas communal cemetery 8 kilometres from Brest in France. John Scott was 21 years old. He'd been with the squadron barely a month. His name is listed here on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember John Keith Scott, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode, the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.